Andrew Weaver, we've heard for so long the questions of uncertainty.
Right.
Is climate change really happening? Right. Is it really being caused by human activity? Do you still see any uncertainty in that question?
Well, I mean, all science has uncertainties in it, and climate science is no different. But there are certain questions that the community is very confident in. For example, we know that the world is warming. We've known that for a long time. We know that much of that warming, in fact, the overwhelming majority of that warming is because of human activity. That is, combustion of fossil fuels and other greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere and warming. So these big questions, there's not uncertainty. The uncertainty comes into, how will that manifest itself out in the future, and in particular on the scales of individual communities or and so forth. Things we can say, for example, we can say that we will expect more overall precipitation in this region, and it'll come in increasing amounts, so that when it rains, the likelihood of coming in an extreme event goes up, and the gap between individual events actually increases too. So we can make those kind of probabilistic statements, but we could never say that it's going to rain 1 inch in Fredericton in 2012, or we can't say one year will be warmer or wetter than the other year in 2012, 2013.
But we are seeing events, as you call them, storms of magnitude, of a frequency, and of a severity that appear unusual. Are they the consequence of climate change?
Well, we can never point to any event and say that event is because of climate change. But what we can say is the change in the frequency of occurrence of such events is because of climate change. So precipitation is a good example. Yeah. We can now say that the increasing observed extreme precipitation events around the world can actually be attributed to global warming and human activity. So we can say that.
If some of the uncertainty, a good deal from your point of view, of the uncertainty has been removed, how is it possible we come through a federal election campaign and the subject of the environment and human impact on it in this country barely gets addressed?
Well, I actually live in Saanich and Gulf Islands, and it was certainly a big issue there. Elizabeth May won our seat. But I think the problem was, as we saw when Stéphane Dion ran, and this was his ticket, he got absolutely shellacked across the country. And I think there's some people are gun shy over discussing this issue, and
politicians
are not people. People, I mean, all across the country, there's a lot of stuff happening, especially at the municipality level, provincial level. It's just federally we have this kind of void of leadership, and it's people are sort of giving up on the federal government.
You're in New Brunswick. This is a province, about half the population lives rurally. On a day like today, the sun's shining. I joked with you when I met you that, doesn't appear to be any climate change here today. But to deal with that question seriously, this is an overarching global concern, but one that is difficult to relay locally. How do you do that? How do you convince people not only that it's a problem, but that they are part of the solution?
Well, this is the key thing. Global warming is a global problem, and everyone is part of that problem. And therefore, everyone is also part of the solution. So there's two types of ways people can act. I mean, there's two broad types of approaches. The first one, and what I'll talk about today in my main talk, is we're not going to solve this problem unless we price emissions. We absolutely have to price emissions. We view the atmosphere as an unregulated dumping ground. We can put anything we want, and there's no cost associated with doing that. So if, as a society, we can actually move down that path towards pricing emissions, we can get a grasp on this problem. At the same time, individuals can actually make a huge difference by just asking, looking at their behavior. By when they go and use their pocketbook in the store, for example. Do you want to buy a bottle of wine that's come from New Zealand, or do you want to buy one that's more local? Do you want to buy a car made in, the other side of the world, or buy one local? So by looking and supporting those industries that are less energy intensive, or those that use energy sources that are renewable, or products that are less harmful, you can actually shift behavior. And there's some really good examples of that. Organic foods, for example, is an example that 20 years ago, there was no organic foods. You'd look at you and just, your jaw would drop. But now, because of consumer demand, there's a real push in terms of producing that. So that the farmers have responded to the desire for organic foods. It can be the same with energy.
Everything you've mentioned, though, the reality behind it is it costs more. It costs the average consumer more. Do we simply have to fess up to the reality that the bill has come due and now we have to pay?
There's some of that, but I disagree. I mean, yes and no. I look at what we did in BC. In the province of British Columbia, there's now a carbon tax. It's going up every year by a little amount. And the money that was generated through the carbon tax in BC was redistributed back into the economy by reducing personal income tax and small business tax. So there was no net money gain. So it's only a net cost if you don't change your behavior. Let's suppose you actually, so if you're driving a big, very big SUV and you keep driving all the time, you're going to pay more. But if you realize that in fact you're going to make a change and drive less, you're actually ahead because you've changed your behavior, and the personal income tax and small business tax reductions have actually rewarded you. So it doesn't have to always be sticks. And there's one particular example. But really, I do think people need to stand back and recognize that there is a cost to anything we do, and it's not only citizens, it's also environmental groups who I think need to actually pause and reflect and realize that historically they've been very good at stopping or protesting against something, but now they have to actually mobilize and actually advocate for something, because whatever we do in terms of transforming our energy systems, there's going to be a footprint. So rather than protesting every footprint, we have to make decisions and actually advocate for those that have a less of an environmental footprint.
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking to us today. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, a real pleasure.
All right.